Margaret Ellison considered herself the reigning queen of New York's social elite. As the wife of Richard Ellison, CEO of Ellison Global Holdings, she had spent years curating an image of elegance and untouchable sophistication. Her charity galas were legendary, not because of the money they raised, but because of the guest list, the gowns, the champagne, and the carefully orchestrated spectacle of status. On a crisp autumn morning, she sat in her penthouse overlooking Central Park, a crystal flute of champagne balanced between her manicured fingers. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Holly, perched across from her, scribbling names as Margaret dictated who would and would not be allowed into the gilded circle that Friday night. "Senator McCall and his wife, add them. They'll expect to be seated near the governor. And Mrs. Livingston, but not her daughter. The girl's engaged to that dreadful venture capitalist. He nearly ruined Richard in a deal 10 years ago." Holly nodded quickly, her pen scratching across the thick invitation list. Margaret flipped a page and suddenly paused, her eyes narrowing with a flicker of mischief. "Wait," she said, a sly smile creeping across her lips. "Let's invite, what's her name? Claire Donovan. That mousy little thing from the bookstore on Fifth Avenue." Holly looked up, startled. "The one who helped you last week, but she isn't." "Society, yes, precisely." Margaret leaned back with satisfaction. Imagine it, a girl like her walking into the Waldorf Grand Ballroom, surrounded by New York's finest. She'll look like a charity case we dressed up and brought along for amusement. It'll give the guests something to laugh about. Add her. Holly hesitated, her pen hovering. "But Mrs. Ellison, do you think she'll actually come?" Margaret's eyes gleamed. "If she has even the faintest hope of belonging, she'll come. People like her can't resist a peek behind the velvet curtain." And with that, the golden invitation was addressed and sent. In a small apartment in Brooklyn, Claire Donovan discovered the envelope 2 days later. She had just returned from her shift at the bookstore, tired but content. Her life was modest, stacking shelves, recommending novels, managing bills. She wasn't wealthy, but she was surrounded by stories, and that was enough. When she slit open the thick envelope and read the embossed lettering, her breath caught. Ellison Global Holdings Charity Gala, an evening of elegance. Her first thought was, it must be a mistake. Why would the Ellisons, people she only saw on society pages, invite her? She sat at her small kitchen table staring at the invitation as if it were a foreign object. Her husband Daniel walked in carrying groceries. He saw the expression on her face and set the bags down. "Claire, what is it?" She handed him the envelope. He read it and raised an eyebrow, then smiled in that calm, knowing way of his. "Apparently," Claire said nervously, "but this has to be a joke, right? Why would people like that want me there? I'd look ridiculous." Daniel placed his hand gently over hers. "Claire, you've spent your whole life thinking you don't belong in certain rooms. Maybe this is the chance to prove to yourself that you do." She shook her head. "Daniel, they'll all be in gowns worth more than our car. They'll laugh at me." His eyes softened. "Then let them. But here's the truth. You have more grace than half of them combined, and you'll never be alone. I'll be right there with you." Claire bit her lip, still doubtful. What she didn't know, and what Daniel had never flaunted, was that he was far from ordinary. Years earlier, he had built Donovan Innovations, a tech company in California that quietly grew into a billion-dollar empire. But he preferred to live simply, away from the hollow glitz of Manhattan's elite. To the world, he was just Claire's supportive husband. Friday evening arrived, and the Waldorf Grand Ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Waiters in tuxedos glided between tables, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The city's wealthiest and most powerful gathered in gowns and tailored suits, air heavy with perfume and whispered ambition. Margaret Ellison stood at the entrance, her sequined gown shimmering as she greeted guests with practiced smiles. She was in her element, basking in the admiration of her carefully chosen circle. Then a sleek black car pulled up outside. The valet opened the door, and Claire stepped out, her arm linked with Daniel's. She wore a midnight blue gown, simple but elegant, chosen by Daniel. Her dark hair fell in soft waves, and the diamond earrings he had given her years ago caught the light with a quiet sparkle. She looked nervous but determined. Beside her, Daniel radiated quiet authority in a tailored black suit. There was nothing ostentatious about him, yet his presence seemed to command the air. He placed his hand over hers as they walked up the steps. Inside, the buzz of conversation faltered as heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who is she? What is she doing here? Margaret, watching from across the hall, nearly choked on her champagne. She actually came, she muttered to her friend. But her eyes darted to Daniel, and she frowned. And who exactly is that? As the couple entered, Daniel smiled at the waiters and thanked them by name after glancing at their name tags. Claire clung to his arm, but held her head high, reminding herself of his words. You have more grace than half of them combined. During dinner, the tension grew thick. Margaret couldn't resist. She swept over to their table, her entourage following like perfume clouds. Her eyes. What a surprise to see you here. Did you find the invitation slipped into the wrong mailbox? A ripple of laughter spread around the table. Claire's cheeks burned, but Daniel turned calmly toward Margaret, his gaze steady. On the contrary, he said, voice smooth but edged with steel, we were personally invited. Though my wife did hesitate at first, she doesn't usually mingle in circles where kindness is so scarce. The laughter died instantly. Margaret blinked, her painted smile faltering. And you are? She asked, eyebrows arched. Daniel extended his hand, every movement deliberate. Daniel Donovan, chairman of Donovan Innovations. The name hit like a thunderclap. Gasps, whispers, even a few audible exclamations swept the room. Donovan Innovations was a household name in the business world, a quiet giant that rivaled Ellison Global itself. Margaret froze, the color draining from her face. She had invited Claire to be a punchline, but she had just escorted a billionaire power couple into her ballroom. Claire, steady now, offered Margaret a small, serene smile. It seems we're right where we belong. The room shifted, and the night was only beginning. The reveal of Daniel Donovan's name traveled through the Waldorf Grand Ballroom like an electric current. At first, there had been laughter, the cruel chuckles of the powerful mocking an outsider. But now there was only silence, broken by a flurry of whispers. Donovan? Could it be? The Daniel Donovan? Across the room, men who ran hedge funds and tech startups suddenly leaned forward in their chairs. Women, draped in gowns worth more than Claire's entire apartment, glanced at her with a mix of envy and curiosity. Journalists, always lurking in the corners, scribbled notes furiously. And Margaret Ellison, still standing by the Donovans' table, forced a smile that no longer had its sting. Well, she stammered, what an unexpected delight. Daniel nodded politely, but without warmth. Unexpected, perhaps. Delightful, time will tell. The jab landed clean. Margaret's cheeks flushed beneath layers of powder, but she refused to retreat. She straightened her spine and walked away, heels clicking like warning shots across the marble floor. From that moment, the entire atmosphere of the gala shifted. Guests who had once dismissed Claire now gravitated toward her, eager to secure even the smallest connection. Businessmen leaned in to shake Daniel's hand, spilling compliments. Your innovations in AI are groundbreaking. I've long admired your renewable energy investments. Socialites cooed at Claire's gown, suddenly calling her elegant and refreshingly understated. Claire, who just an hour earlier had doubted she belonged in the room, found herself at the center of attention, but unlike Margaret, she didn't bask in it. She listened. She asked questions. When a young philanthropist nervously described her project to bring books to underfunded schools, Claire lit up. That's wonderful. I run a little bookstore, and I've seen firsthand how a single book can change a child's life. Her voice carried sincerity, a rarity in the room, and people noticed. Margaret noticed too. Watching from across the ballroom, she seethed. The very woman she had invited as a cruel joke was stealing the spotlight, not through wealth or gowns, but through warmth and authenticity. And worse, Richard Ellison himself had drifted over to Daniel's side, all smiles and handshakes. "Mr. Donovan, it's an honor. I think we should discuss a potential partnership. Ellison Global and Donovan Innovations. Imagine the possibilities." Daniel's expression remained cordial, but his words were pointed. "Perhaps, but I prefer partnerships built on integrity. Sometimes numbers aren't enough." Richard's smile stiffened. Margaret clenched her glass so hard she thought it might shatter. When the charity auction began, Margaret saw her chance to reclaim control. She swept to the stage, microphone in hand, her sequined gown sparkling beneath the chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she purred, "tonight we have something truly extraordinary, a private Mediterranean yacht experience, hosted personally by Richard and me. We'll start the bidding at 50,000. Hands shot up, 70,000, 80, 95. The crowd was animated, and Margaret felt a rush of triumph. This was her domain: luxury, exclusivity, indulgence. Then from the middle of the ballroom, Daniel raised his hand. 500,000. Gasps erupted. The auctioneer blinked. Margaret's eyes widened, delight flickering, until Daniel added calmly, "And I request the proceeds be redirected to literacy programs in underfunded schools. My wife has dedicated herself to that cause." The room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping, some even cheering. Suddenly, the yacht trip seemed trivial compared to the idea of transforming education. Inspired, others followed Daniel's example. A hedge fund manager pledged $250,000 for after-school tutoring. A fashion mogul redirected her bid to fund libraries. In minutes, the auction became not about yachts or jewels, but about impact. Claire sat beside Daniel, stunned but glowing, her hand gripping his under the table. He glanced at her, smiling. "This is your night too," he whispered. Margaret's plan had unraveled completely. What was supposed to be her triumphant show of power had become a stage for Claire and Daniel to elevate causes that actually mattered. By midnight, the Donovans were the undisputed stars of the evening. Guests clustered around them, not out of shallow curiosity, but genuine admiration. Claire spoke passionately about books and children. Daniel listened intently to young entrepreneurs pitching ideas. They weren't just present, they were present with purpose. Margaret, meanwhile, stood alone by the champagne table. Her friends had abandoned her, drifting toward the glow of the Donovans. Even the press, once eager to photograph her gowns, now turned their lenses toward Claire, capturing her in candid moments of laughter and grace. Finally, as the crowd thinned, Margaret made one last attempt. She approached Claire near the exit, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Don't get comfortable," she hissed. "Tonight doesn't change who you are. You'll always be that little bookstore girl." Claire turned, meeting her eyes steadily. For the first time all evening, she didn't feel small. "Yes, Margaret," she said softly. "I'll always be the bookstore girl. And I'm proud of it. Because while you mock people, I help them find stories that change their lives. And tonight, maybe I changed a little of this room too." Daniel slipped his arm around her shoulders, and together they walked out into the cool night air. The next morning, New York's society pages told a very different story than Margaret had imagined. Headlines read, "Daniel and Claire Donovan, power couple with purpose. Gala transformed by bookstore girl's billionaire husband. Ellison Gala, overshadowed by Donovan's humility and vision." Photos of Claire, radiant in her simple midnight blue gown, graced the covers. Reporters praised her warmth, her sincerity, her refusal to be intimidated. Margaret's name was buried deep in the articles, mentioned only as the host. The spotlight she craved had slipped away, handed instead to the woman she had intended to humiliate. And in quiet apartments and offices across the city, ordinary people read the headlines and smiled. Because in a world obsessed with wealth and status, a bookstore girl had reminded them of something richer. That true power lies not in mocking others, but in lifting them up. Margaret Ellison had tried to make a joke, but the laugh in the end was on her.